Hello, listeners. This is the What is Nerd podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Dietz. With me is Nick Grant.
Hey, man. Let's talk. What is this? Star Trek. I almost said Star Wars. Let's do Star Trek.
Yes, let's talk Star Trek. And I'm also here with JP. What's up, JP?
Nothing. Just ready to watch Star Trek, or talk about Star Trek.
You sound like you've really gotten into the spirit of things. It's good to see that.
Yeah.
So yes, obviously today we are talking about Star Trek. This is our second Star Trek episode. If you haven't listened to our first one, go back and listen to last week's episode in which we talked about Star Trek, the original series. We selected 5 classic, iconic episodes. But today we're going to be talking about Star Trek, the motion picture, which was released in 1979, and Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, released in 1982. Before we get into it, a couple of social media plugs. Like us on our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter at WhatIsNerd1 with no question mark. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, any of the podcasting apps of your choosing. Finally, if you haven't yet, check out our sister show, What is Sports, in which we talk about sports stuff. And, of course, send us an email at winerdcast@gmail.com if you have any comments, questions, or concerns. But let's go ahead and get into it. So JP was unfortunately not able to join us on the previous episode, but he's got some thoughts on Star Trek, the original series. So, JP, what'd you think? I guess you established that you thought it was super boring from the little snippets that you had seen at work and stuff like that. So have your feelings changed on it?
Minimally. So I don't know. I still have this feeling like I still just want to compare Star Trek to Star Wars, because Star Trek is just there's it's more focused on dialogue. I guess there's so much dialogue in it, and Star Wars is just like, it's got a good dialogue, but it's also just action, and like special effects and everything. And I mean, I know Star Trek has that too. And actually, in ways, maybe Star Trek is, I don't know, maybe the writers of Star Trek were even better because it relies so much on, the script and dialogue.
Yeah, because like TV back in the 60s, like they were, they had a very limited budget, and they like literally couldn't, create the things that some of that like Star Wars would have demanded, for example. And so they had to rely on dialogue mostly, because really Star Trek, you break it down as mostly people talking in rooms, right?
Right.
And so I guess thinking of it as its own thing, though, I mean, and you watched a few of the episodes, so I guess what are the things that you like and dislike about it? From what you saw?
I like the I guess character development, because like I said, I mean there's just, I don't know, it's just like you get to know the characters pretty well because so much of the show is surrounded by just dialogue and conversation, and I guess you get to know the characters pretty well through after just having them, after hearing them converse with one another. I like Spock. I mean, I just like the,
Spock's the man.
Yeah, Spock's the man. I like how he's always, just looking at things in the way he does.
Well, and
in his logical sense, that's what.
What I like about Spock is that the show is also quick to point out his flaws, right? Because he's a logical character, so it seems like everything that he would say makes sense. But I love that the show points out the problem in that, right? And taking emotion out of everything. And so that's why I like him a lot. And then, and like last episode, Nick, we talked about how Kirk is sort of a balance between emotion and logic. Yeah. And then McCoy is the full-on emotional character, right?
Emotion, you said?
Yes. Yeah. Bones.
Yeah. So he's the doctor, right? Or the
yes.
Yeah. I was about to say McCoy. Yeah, I like him. He's definitely one of my favorites. I don't know. He's kind of like a comedic relief in some ways.
I feel like that each
Yeah.
character in the show is their own comedic relief at some point. Like, there's obviously a lot of drama that happens, but like we talked about in the last episode, how the Trouble with Tribbles was basically written as a comedy. You know, it was all. I mean, I didn't think
Yeah.
it was that funny, but it was written in the style of a comedy, and I think that's, there's a lot of humor in the show.
So yeah, and even like kind of Spock, I don't know, in some ways makes fun of himself. I don't know, in subtle ways, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's just fun, yeah, and especially the dialogue between McCoy and Spock because they're so different.
Right, because you watched, JP, did you watch the Galileo 7 episode?
Yes,
The
yes.
one where they crash land on the planet? Yeah.
Yeah, and they're like those things like would throw spears at him or something.
And
Yeah, the
boulders.
giants.
Yeah.
And really, I think
Cool.
the relationship between Spock and Bones is probably the most important relationship in the entire series, because Captain Kirk, he's making these decisions, but obviously he's using input and advice from his trusty crew members, and like we said, they're each their own spectrum, and it's trying to find the balance, and that's pretty much what the show's about in some aspects. So,
Yeah, well, and so Kirk is the balance, right? So what's funny in the episodes that we watched, and I also watched several episodes other than the 5 that we did for the show, but Kirk is like a perfect character, like a perfect person, basically, like the ideal leader, right? He's the perfect balance between logic and emotion. Mm-hmm. And to transition to the first movie, Star Trek: The Motion Picture, that's what makes the Star Trek: The Motion Picture, 1979. It's what makes it such a weird movie, because I feel like Kirk in the first Star Trek movie is kind of like washed up, like he's kind of a fool.
Yeah. Well,
in
I
this
feel like
movie.
he's just kind of mean. I don't know. He's kind of a jerk.
Yeah, exactly. And so we'll get into it. I just kind of want to introduce it real quick. So Star Trek: The Motion Picture, this is the first movie we're going to be talking about. This is, it was made 2 years after Star Wars, okay? And also Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which we haven't talked about it on the show, but it was a very groundbreaking science fiction movie, right? Y'all seen Close Encounters, right?
no.
What? JP, have you seen it?
No,
Do you think
I know what it's about, but I haven't.
We'll do it someday. We'll do like a Steven Spielberg series. But classic science fiction movie. But this was also the same year as Alien, and it was 1 year before Empire Strikes Back. Okay, so science fiction is kind of hitting its high point. This was several years after the original series aired. Okay, so this was 10 years after the original series was taken off air. The animated series did exist from 1973 to 1974, but the Star Trek story also continued in like comic books and novels and stuff. And there was also a magazine called Starlog magazine that was a Star Trek / science fiction magazine. So Star Trek, even though it had been off the air for about 10 years, it was still a big part of popular culture. So they brought it back as a movie, especially after the new success of science fiction movies in theaters. So that kind of sets the stage for Star Trek: The Motion Picture. I guess Nick, you kind of want to take us through like a summary of what happens in this movie.
Yeah, and I'll be pretty brief, and then we can, if I miss anything, we can go back and when we give our general thoughts. But yeah, so the movie starts up, everybody's excited. You see 3 Klingon ships, right? They're flying to this cloud, and like, hey man, we gotta attack it. Well, they do, and then the cloud basically shoots back, and it shoots these like lightning bolt at the Klingon ships, and they just vanish.
Yeah,
And
it like
that's-
vaporizes them.
Right. It's just kind of weird. You're
Well,
like, well,
okay.
what happened?
And the first thing that I noticed was the Klingon makeup, right? So because we had seen the Klingons in the Trouble with Tribbles episode, and they looked completely different. So
Yeah, they look like regular people with
Yeah.
big eyebrows.
yeah, and now so you get the bigger budget, right? The more enhanced special effects. And granted, some of the stuff, like the spaceship stuff, the version that we watched on Hulu, and I believe it's also it's the version that's mostly available for streaming, is actually a 2001 remaster with updated special effects. But even so, like just looking at the makeup and stuff, like you can tell that this is they're able to do things that they never would have dreamed of being able to do on the show, you know?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Well, I'm sorry. This is kind of like I don't know, off topic here, but I didn't know that. I guess Star Trek was canceled after a certain amount of seasons.
And that's what's funny about the show is it says in the opening crawl, it talks about a 5-year mission. Mm-hmm. Boldly going where no man's gone before. The original series only lasted 3 seasons. And so then the animated series picked up a few years later and did the last 2 years.
See, that's crazy. In my mind, like Star Trek went on for like a decade or something like that, like with the original cast. So
like it seems like that, and I think that these movies coming out kind of makes it feel that way because really the legacy of the show, the movies kind of pick that up and then continue it. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people, I feel like, are, especially before Star Trek was made available for streaming, like on Netflix and stuff, a lot of people only really knew Star Trek through the movies. Like Nick, right? Like you only watched the movies whenever you got curious about it.
Yeah, I've only seen the movies until, a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
But
and so anyways, so the Klingons get vaporized in the plot of the show. What happens next?
So next we see Spock. He's on Vulcan, and he has long hair now. It looks kind of like a hippie. And basically, he's doing some ritual to basically dehumanize. Dehumanize himself. Thank you, Deej.
Yeah, he's getting rid of. He's like cleansing himself of all emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Right, to be full logical and full Vulcan, basically. And it turns out that he's talking to his ritual masters, and they go, "Oh, Spock, you failed." And
because he hears like a voice, he gets like a spidey sense that's calling him to go do something. And I guess that I don't know if they see that and they're like, "Oh, this guy's not ready to graduate yet." But yeah, he blows it for some reason.
Yeah, he does for the story of Star Trek. He blows it, and So then we really don't know what happens next. I mean, with him.
But anyways, so Nick, I guess, so after we get the bit with Spock, what happens next with the, what do we see next?
Next, they're hanging out at Starfleet in San Francisco, and Kirk, he just appears, and he's apparently...
Well, and what struck me is that Kirk looks so old now. Like, Spock looks pretty similar. Like, he doesn't look like he's aged a ton, but Kirk looks like really old.
I mean, it's 10 years later, and he's probably, I don't know. He's just like, I'm not going to play this character again, and didn't really care. And
right, let himself go.
Yeah, I guess so. But yeah, we find out that Kirk, he no longer is commanding the Enterprise, and he's kind of, I don't want to say a desk job, but he's just hanging out at Starfleet as a commander.
Yeah.
And anyways, there's that big space cloud. Starfleet, they say, hey, this thing's coming to Earth, and we need a crew to stop it. So Kirk says, you know what, I'll jump on the Enterprise and we'll take it out. And while he gets there, he runs into his whole crew. Sulu's there, Uhura, Scotty, all of them, and
they all look old.
They all look much older.
I think that I feel like the one who's aged the best is Sulu. He doesn't look much older, but everyone else is like they look way different.
Right.
Like
well,
years.
Sulu looked like he was 13 in the original series.
Right. Yeah.
So he looks great. Yeah. But yeah, he gets on ship to Enterprise, and it's there's a new captain called Captain Decker, who's younger, and we find out that they've done upgrades and things to the Enterprise, and Kirk tells Decker, "Hey, I'm now the captain of the ship. You'll be my advisor, basically."
Yeah. And this is whenever. So if I'm watching the movie, and this is when I turn on Kirk, right? Because I'm like, okay, Decker's been the boss. He knows how the ship works. He knows the upgrades and all that stuff. Captain Kirk is this old man who's out of touch, and he comes back and he's like, "Hey, boy, I'm in charge now." And
well, actually, now he's not even Captain Kirk; he's Admiral Kirk.
That's right. Yeah, he has the authority to take over the ship, but Decker's like, like, who the hell are you? Like,
Well, he
he's
says,
like,
with all due respect, I've been on the ship for years. You don't know it like I do it. And Kirk
Exactly.
says, that's okay. This is my crew. I'll do it. And so Decker's mad. He has every right to be.
yeah.
Yeah, and like I don't know, in real life, no one wants the old washed up guy to take command. I mean, everybody would have like I don't know, a lot more trust in the younger, guy who's up to date with the new technology and everything like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like taking like a sports metaphor. That's like if like the coach, who used to play football, is now putting on shoulder pads and trying to become the quarterback. Yeah, like
Yeah, it probably wouldn't turn out too well.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. So anyway, so Kirk, they distinguish that he's going to be the captain, and they take off for space. And well, before that, Spock shows up and they're all reunited, and everybody's so happy to see Spock, but he doesn't have emotion, so he's like, where will I be going? And they're
Yeah.
like, oh, okay. Well, like the people wanted to hug him and be happy to see him, and Spock shows no emotion and no happiness seeing everybody for the reunion.
Yeah, well,
And,
and the thing with that is that because on top of Kirk showing up and telling Decker, hey, I'm the boss now, you can just be my consultant or whatever, and then he's like, oh, by the way, because their science officer gets like vaporized, like gets like destroyed in like a failed teleportation thing. Y'all remember that?
Oh yeah, it was
like
weird.
their beamer machine messes up, so it kills their science officer, and so then Decker is forced to kind of be the new science officer now. He's like, okay, sure, what else you got? And so it's like these weird like mistakes start happening right off the bat. And if I'm a Star Trek fan and I've waited 10 years for them to make a movie about it, and I'm coming and watching this, and you start off the movie where like they have the big scene where they're getting onto the Enterprise, and they have all this music, and it's like this really super long process in which you see the Enterprise.
Yeah, I know that lasted forever. Like I was about to just fast forward it or something.
They're like, wow, it's the Enterprise, and then it just kept flying, and it's like, okay, we get it.
Yeah, and so you're supposed to feel excited, but then there's all these stupid little mistakes where it just kind of seems like stuff isn't working. And like Kirk doesn't know what he's doing. Like the science officer getting killed, and then whenever they make the jump to warp drive, like that turns into a crisis. Like that should be like simple, right? Like if your job is to fly around in a spaceship, and you go to warp mode or whatever, like, and then they had that part whenever they're all like speaking in slow motion.
I think part of it is, the story really is relatively short when you get down to the nuts and bolts of it. It's not that of a complicated story.
Yeah.
And I think they wrote the movie with a TV script writing thought process. Like, let's make a Star Trek episode, and so like we need to have all this filler where we have 20 minutes for Kirk to fly to the Enterprise when he's only like 15 feet away. And then we'll have just these random little things happen. Like, let's put them through warp drive, and let's actually show that. And we'll also take another 10 minutes because, hey, why not? And so I think that was part of it. They're just so happy to make a Star Trek movie. They just thought, I guess it almost feels like they made it just straight for the hardcore fans almost, and not a casual sci-fi fantasy viewer.
Yeah, like I wonder back in the day, like what these, if the only people who watched these movies were, like the big Trekkies, or if they gained a new audience after like making these movies. I don't know.
No, they probably did, because because if it's a movie, it's gonna be a little more mainstream, and so obviously it reaches a wider audience. And People Plus were probably excited because a show that was canceled 10 years ago is coming back to a movie. Like Deet said, sci-fi was really getting big with Star Wars and everything. So yeah, I'm sure it brought a lot of people to this world, and they probably didn't want to do too much so the casual viewer could follow along with the story.
Yeah,
Right.
but 10 years is a long time ago, though. So 2009, okay? And, like, I feel like I got to bring up Lost every episode. But Lost ended, I think, in 2009. So that would be like if they made a Lost movie today. And that seems like forever ago, doesn't it?
It does.
Like, I feel like and nowadays it's different because you have, like, streaming platforms, and so shows stick around longer. So obviously, like with like Star Trek episodes, those were like syndicated and like rebroadcast on TV channels. But it's not like you could back in the day just go back and watch a bunch of Star Trek whenever you wanted to. And so I feel like they had to make, or they should have made, something that was accessible to new audiences, right? They couldn't have expected to, I guess, make the money back with just the hardcore fans coming back. You know what I'm saying?
And I agree. But yeah, moving on with the story. So they're headed to this this cloud thing in space because it's headed to Earth. They finally get to it, and they get close. And like, Captain, should we try to communicate with it? And Kirk says, "Nah, man. They'll think we're trying to attack it. Let's just fly in this space cloud." So they do, and this is another extremely long scene. I ended up fast forwarding quite a bit while the Enterprise
cloud.
is going into this cloud. It took forever. And also, did y'all seen Independence Day, right? To me, it looked just like the scene when Will Smith and Jeff Goldblum are flying into the mothership in the giant alien ship. Did y'all see the similarities, or was that just me?
Well, to me, have y'all seen 2001: A Space Odyssey?
I have not.
Oh gosh, no. I saw like the first. I saw the first 45 minutes where no one said
with
one
the apes,
word.
with the monkeys and stuff.
Yeah, like the beginning of time. I watched the beginning of time, which it was like in real time too. It took about the same.
Yeah.
amount of time.
Oh yeah. That we got to cover that movie on the show sometime.
Oh yeah. Okay, funny story. That's. I remember I didn't watch that with you, but you had that DVD at our apartment. And everybody, like, I had nothing to do one night, and so I just was looking for a good movie to watch, and so I put that one in, and that was a mistake.
You're like, what is this? It's like 45 minutes of like monkeys screaming at each other, right?
Yeah, basically.
That's well. Anyways, so the end of that movie is this super, and that came out in 1968, I think. But the end of that movie is a really, really, really long, like psychedelic, just colors and just tripping out, like, and it was very much like this. That's what this reminded me of, the end of 2001: A Space Odyssey. We'll watch that sometime on this show. You'll have to suffer through the whole thing.
But yeah, once they go through that long tunnel that takes another 20 minutes for them to get to where they need to go, they stop at what looks like a butthole like door. It like keeps opening and closing. It's like so weird. Like that's all I thought. It was like a butthole trying to give them kisses. It was weird. And so there's.
And this is when it turns into a porno.
No, that's a different kind of. That's a different movie. But so they're basically sitting in this cloud. Like, well, what do we do? I don't know. And there's this bald chick who's super smart. Who's in love with Decker. Basically, they have this relationship. And while they're sitting in the middle of this space cloud, this beam of light comes on, and everybody's like, "What is this?" And then Spock says, "I'm gonna kill it." And then he gets attacked, and then the space light takes her name's Aya. What was it?
Is it Illyria?
Ilya or something like it. Whatever. Let's call her Baldy Girl. And so everybody's like, "Man, she's gone." Well, then she comes back, and she sounds like a robot. She's like, "I am sent by V'ger." And anyway, she's trying to learn about the Enterprise, and Decker's showing her around. He's like, "Don't you?"
Well, okay. So the way I understood it is that I'm pretty sure her name's Elia.
We'll stick with Baldy.
She actually she's killed by the beam of light. It vaporizes her and kills her. But the being, the cloud, makes like a replica of her, like a synthetic replica, like it, like little machine parts, like completely copy her, like down to like her brain. And yeah, she's sent as like a messenger to communicate with them so that she can learn about them. And she's demanding to be taken to the creator, right?
Yeah, that's why the cloud's heading to Earth, is to meet the creator. And of course, nobody knows what they're talking about. And so while that happens, Spock, he's like, "Man, I'm tired of sitting around while Decker's talking to Robot Baldy and nobody's really doing anything. I'm going to get in this little space jetpack and go fly into that little space cloud butthole that keeps opening and closing." So Spock jumps in, and he starts. It's another kind of psychedelic trip. He says, "Oh," he looks over and sees a planet. And he goes, "That must be the planet from V'ger's home world." And then he sees all these planets around him. He sees this big bright light, then basically gets shocked and electrocuted, and goes back to the Enterprise. And then
and he learns that V'ger came from a machine planet. So it's like a planet that's
Yes.
completely inhabited by artificial intelligence machines. I guess what's revealed eventually is that so V'ger is actually heading to Earth because it was built by humans. Because
Yes.
it was like, so the Voyager, right? And it was the Voyager 6. Okay, it was a space probe that was sent from Earth back in the day. Now in real life, there was a Voyager 1 and a Voyager 2, which were both launched in 1977, so just a couple years before this movie was made. And that was it. They just did Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 in real life. But this movie kind of predicts that they launched up to 6 Voyager probes. And basically these were probes with like a bunch of like data, like they'd be like playing like music and stuff, and like have like video stored, and basically just to kind of introduce Earth to anybody who's out there, right? Yeah. And so what happened is Voyager 6 ended up going through like a wormhole and landed on a planet of AIs, and it's like these AI machines programmed Voyager to become another AI machine and to seek its home place, seek its creator, which I think is really cool at like a philosophical level. It's almost like religious, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right? Like,
that's pretty cool.
And so that's what I really liked about this movie, is that the Voyager is basically, or the V'ger is basically on like a spiritual journey to find out where it came from. And so that's kind of the big twist though, right? Because they go into the like inner depths of this of V'ger, and they find the satellite and all that stuff.
That is a really cool backstory though, because just the real life, or just everything being tied in together. So just how they predict.
Yeah, like the way a science fiction movie like this can connect with something that back then was a current events thing.
Yeah.
See what happens. They convince.
basically they say, "Hey, you don't have to destroy us," and V'ger basically is like, "All right," and Decker basically says, "Hey, I'll stay with V'ger, and we'll travel the." They tell the V'ger that, "Hey, you can still travel the universe. You don't have to meet your creator because your creator is not really on Earth anymore," and say, "Okay." And so Decker gets light absorbed with Ilia or whatever her name was, and then they kind of go off, and then the Enterprise flies away, and Kirk he's sitting in the captain's seat, and they're like, "Well, where should we go?" And he goes, "Over there, in those by those stars," and they take off through another wormhole, and that's how the movie.
Yeah,
goes.
because with Decker, I guess that they figure it like, okay, if Decker goes with V'ger, then V'ger has accomplished its mission, right? Like if it's accomplished its programming, it's like I guess absorbed a human or whatever, and so it's it's done. Now I can just kind of live free or whatever. And
Right.
they and so I said that this, and you guys haven't seen Close Encounters of the Third Kind, but the ending of this is pretty similar to that in that Decker volunteers to kind of go with another, like an alien life form, basically. So I kind of saw some similarities there. And but what was funny about that is that Kirk, his whole thing was that he was kind of like feeling like insecure, like he was being overshadowed by Decker. Like Decker was kind of some kind of a threat to him. But now that Decker's gone, it worked out fine for Kirk, and now Kirk can just be the captain of the ship like he wanted to.
Right. Yeah, and one of my main notes, I thought like the main theme was kind of finding your purpose.
Yeah.
Because V'ger, that's all V'ger wanted to do was find the creator and have a purpose. Spock thought he wanted to be full Vulcan and not have any emotion, and then turns out he likes being who he is, and that's basically what Kirk wanted. He wanted a purpose. He wasn't having the same fulfillment as being an admiral, kind of at a desk job in Starfleet, and then now with Decker out of the way, he's now kind of back to captaining the Enterprise,
Right.
and so he found his purpose. He says, this is what I want to do, and so that's why I said, Sulu, fly out there towards them stars, and then they that's how it ends, like I said, and so he found his purpose and enjoyment in life again, and I felt like that was the main theme, and overall I thought it was an alright movie. It wasn't bad, little dated, but
Yeah.
JP.
So what year was did Star Wars come out?
Star Wars was 77, the first Star Wars. Empire was
Okay.
80.
And then so this
Yeah,
one was
so this was a
79.
couple years after.
Okay, so how do you feel about, because someone who I don't know has Dees, before all of this, did you watch much Star Trek before you had
No,
us?
actually, I didn't know.
Because-
That's one big reason why I wanted to do Star Trek for the show, is because I have been completely ignorant about Star Trek, basically until we started doing this show.
I don't know, just because I guess all my life I've just compared Star Trek and Star Wars, and I mean, yeah, I like Star Wars a lot more, but I mean, Star Trek is different. I think maybe it's got some deeper themes to it or underlying messages.
Well, the difference to me is that Star Wars is more of a fantasy franchise. It really doesn't have much resemblance to our reality, right? Whereas Star Trek is definitely science fiction.
Okay.
Like it takes ideas and like concepts that we have about our world and extends them, right? Like the Voyager thing, like that's science fiction. Whereas Star Wars, they got space wizards, right? Like
Yeah,
it's
that's
completely
true.
different.
And also Star Trek, it kind of plays on man and machines will just
Yeah.
be united, to become one like species. And I mean, we're kind of moving into that direction. I mean, just we're at the very forefront of it.
Terminator.
We've got just bionic people out there with artificial limbs and hearts and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah. Well, and I like Nick's interpretation a lot about how it's about finding your purpose. I think that Spock, right, learning that actually it's not good to go all logic, right? Because and I feel like that's a lesson that Spock learns frequently.
He seems to forget it too, because he's like, "No,
Yeah.
I'm gonna be a full Vulcan." And he's like, maybe
Yeah.
that's not the best idea."
Yeah, because V'ger, right? Like the machine is it's an artificial intelligence, so that's something that's completely driven
Right.
by logic, and it's it results in destroying things because it must complete its task at all cost, right? And so it risks the entire world because it's got to complete its task. So yeah, I mean, you know what? The first time I saw this movie, I didn't think it was great. Actually, this is my second time watching it because I watched it a while ago whenever I was doing research for the show, for potential topics we could do. And so I actually thought this movie was pretty good. I think my main complaint is it is way too long. This could have been a really good single-hour episode of Star Trek.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, because they show they have those long scenes, unnecessary scenes of
A lot of that easily could have been cut out. Also, the whole deal with Kirk, being a retired admiral, or not retired, but being an admiral and then coming back to the ship. That was I feel like that subplot actually detracted from Kirk. I feel like an original draft of this story would have been Decker was just a red shirt, basically, and Kirk was already the captain. I feel like that.
Yeah, because he comes back and he's like a bully. He's kind of like a bully.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It makes him less appealing of a character. So,
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I guess, is there any other closing thoughts on Star Trek the Motion Picture before we move on to the next one?
I just wanted to say that I feel like they really should have named this movie Star Trek. We finally have a budget.
Yeah.
Because I feel like they were just using all the CGI that they could, all the special effects that they could, and they said, hey, we we got the Star Wars movie. Let's kind of do something like that. And so they're showing all this new technology. And also, did you notice the amount of space people, like astronauts, just floating in space, like throughout the movie?
Yeah, like they did that just because they could.
Yeah, there's an
Yeah.
abundance of them. Like, hey, let's just get a little model of a spaceman, just put him in here every now and then, just flying around. There's really no purpose for it, but there's so many of them.
Yeah, they're in space, you know.
Yeah.
I also wanted to point out the uniforms in this one. They were all like earth tones, and I thought it looked terrible. Like everyone looked the same, you know. Like the uniforms were all
Yeah.
like gray and brown and stuff.
Yeah, I wonder why they changed it up. I don't know.
I think to fit the aesthetic of the time a bit more. Maybe people saw their old uniforms as being kind of cheesy. Let's transition to Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan in just a minute. All right. Now, sorry, listeners. JP actually had to step out to feed his horses.
He's got his horses in the back.
Well, it's funny because the stereotype of Texans is that we all have horses and farms and stuff. And JP is literally the only person I know who has a horse. But sure enough, he has to go feed his horses. So he'll get his opinion of Wrath of Khan next episode. But yeah, so Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. This came out in 1982, the same year as The Dark Crystal, and Blade Runner. Nick, have you seen Blade Runner?
Yes, I actually have seen that.
Okay.
It's been a while. I think I liked it.
Yeah.
I kind of want to see it again.
We'll do Blade Runner sometime on the show because it's good. I don't know. It's interesting. We'll talk about it another time. I'm sure that JP hasn't seen it though.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure everything we talk about on the show he hasn't seen or experienced.
Right.
So.
Man, I mean, shoot, he ain't even seen Sesame Street. Something wrong with the guy. But anyways, so Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. I remember hearing a lot about how this is the best one. I feel like a lot of people feel that way, right?
Yeah, that's the main general consensus. And so I know you said you weren't that huge of a fan of it, but I think, maybe it's because people have built it up too much. I thought it was a pretty good movie, but yeah, people consider it to be the best.
Yeah,
Star
okay.
Trek movie.
To kind of give my opening thoughts on it, I was disappointed because I think I would have liked this movie a lot more if this was my first Star Trek thing that I had seen. I think because we had seen several episodes of the show, and the fact that this basically just felt like a extended episode of the show made it disappointing, right?
Yeah, I can see that, and I agree because this was, I know this was the first original series cast movie that I've seen that I
Yeah.
saw, and so when I saw it, I thought, man, that's pretty good. It's a good science fiction movie, and I think it was good. I think the second time I watched it, I don't think I liked it as much, but I still thought it was enjoyable.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people who are big fans of this movie like it because it's a good example of a Star Trek story, but that's it though, right? Like, yeah, again, if I were introducing someone to Star Trek, I'd probably say watch this one first out of everything. Because, again, like, you really don't need to know that much going into it because, honestly, to kind of dive into the story of it, even though it is kind of a sequel to one of the episodes that we watched, The Space Seed, you really don't need to have seen The Space Seed in order to get it.
Oh, no, they do a good job of recapping it pretty quick.
It starts off with it seems to be a new crew on the Enterprise, right? The captain is a female Vulcan named Savick, which I think I saw you make this note. They call her Mister throughout the whole show.
Yeah, I thought that was really weird. It's like, no, that's a woman. That's Kirstie Alley. That's a woman.
Well, I actually kind of did some research on it because I was curious about that too. And I saw that, some people on the internet said that it was because originally the role had been written as a man and they just didn't change it in the script. But the answer that I thought was a bit more satisfying or made more sense was that actually apparently in the Navy, lieutenants are referred to as Mr. regardless of gender. So
Okay.
whenever you address lieutenant, you call them Mister. Her rank is lieutenant or lieutenant something. Yeah, because you would call an admiral, Admiral so and so. You would call captain so and so, and so then lieutenant, you would call them Mister so and so. So kind of makes sense because they use naval terminology for the other Star Trek's ranks and all that stuff. So it makes sense to me. But anyway, so she's in this. She's commanding everything, and they get their butts kicked right by this thing that they're fighting. And
Yeah, everything goes downhill real quick.
yeah, and everything explodes and everyone dies, and you're like, geez, okay. But it turns out this is just a training exercise, and that Kirk is the one who's conducting it. So he deliberately gave them a no-win scenario just to kind of test how she reacted. And then you get the bit whenever Kirk is talking to McCoy, and he says this quote, I wrote this down. He said, "Galloping around the cosmos is a game for the young." And that's why he's training, a new crew, which is ironic, I thought, because they still have 5 more original series cast movies to go after this. But
Granted, they didn't know that at the time.
right,
But I mean, yeah, because this came out. What year did you say? 82.
82.
Yeah, and the last movie was 10 years later.
Yeah, something like that. So these
Yeah.
guys, yeah.
So he's got 10 more years.
And okay, all of the Star Trek crew, they're in their 80s now. They're so old.
No, they're not.
Yes, they
They're
are.
that
They're
old.
in their 80s. Look it up.
Are you talking about right now or in the movie?
No, currently nowadays.
Yeah. Well, yeah. but in the movie, they're not that old.
Well, they would still be pretty old, because that's
Yeah.
82, so that's like 35 years ago or something like that. So that's they're still in their 40s and 50s,
Yeah.
But anyways, then you get to it transitions to another ship. Chekhov, right, is on the Russian guy. He's on another crew, and they land on this planet. Right, what are they doing there? They land on this planet for some reason.
Well, they're looking. It's not really clear, but they're looking for a planet where there isn't any life whatsoever.
That's right, because they're testing out a device called the Genesis that can. It's basically it's a thing that it's like a clean slate for a planet, right? It
Right.
wipes out everything that's there, and it creates life, pretty much. It creates a habitable planet, but it would destroy everything else that's living on the planet right then, right?
Yes.
Okay, and so Chekhov and this other guy, Chekhov's friend,
Well, wasn't Captain Terrell?
maybe, I don't know.
I think that was his name, but I could be wrong.
But so they are ambushed by Khan, who recognizes Chekhov.
Yeah. Okay. This thing I wanted to point out, even though you're kind of leading into it. This when I watched this, I had to do a double take, and this will make me sound really nerdy, and I'm okay with that. So here's my problem with this scene. So Chekhov, he's on this ship because there's a crash ship, and it says Botany Bay, and that was where Khan was from, and in the episode Space Seed.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he says we got to get out of here, and that was my awesome Russian
Very
accent,
good.
just in
Spot
case. Thank you.
on.
Yes. And anyways, he runs into Khan, and Chekhov goes Khan, and Khan says, "Oh yes, I never forget a face." Well, that's funny because while it might be true, he had never seen Chekhov.
Right?
Because Chekhov wasn't introduced in Star Trek until season 2, while Space Seed happened in season 1, and that's when he was exiled to this planet. So they've never met. So I can understand that Chekhov might have heard the stories of Khan and known who he was, but the fact that he recognized Khan shouldn't have happened. And the fact that Khan knew who Chekhov was
Yeah.
definitely shouldn't have happened. So that's my 2 cents. It's a continuity issue I had, but
Yeah, Star Trek writers, you can't get it past us nerds.
yeah,
All right?
yeah. As soon as I noticed that, I was like, man, I was super nerdy of me. But I mean, it's true.
Hey, that's what it's all about, though. Shoot, you got to make sure your stuff, matches up, y'all. And that, a million nerds were complaining about that whenever this movie came out. Oh yeah, Chekhov never met Khan in the show. But unless you could argue
Sure.
the fact that maybe Chekhov was a member of the crew whenever the Space Seed episode happened, but he was not a character on the show. Does that make sense? Like he could have been on the ship and just not been a character.
Yeah. Anyway, I think it was just, I don't know.
Yeah.
They just did it.
Yeah.
But
Anyways, yeah, I thought that was funny too, though. But so yeah, the whole thing with this is Khan. They use these like sandworm bug things that crawl into their ear that can control their brains, right?
Yeah, it's pretty weird.
Yeah, and so they get onto the space station or whatever that has the Genesis project, right? Or he convinces Chekhov to or he forces Chekhov to convince the rest of the crew. That's the Reliant is the name of the ship or the space station or whatever that has the Genesis device, and convinces them to give him control over it. And so they contact Kirk for confirmation because they're like, hey, this is weird. Let's check in with Kirk to see if this is accurate. And he can't respond, but he knows what's going on, so he goes off to investigate. And so, yeah, I guess we kind of learned that Khan he's seeking revenge on Kirk, right?
Oh, yeah.
For beating him, I guess. Which, okay, Khan's motivations of revenge don't necessarily make sense to me because Kirk gave him a fresh start, right? Like, he put him on this planet so that he could kind of build his own Garden of Eden, I guess,
Yeah, but also Khan, like, I think it was more difficult than he originally anticipated because the planet they were on
It's like a desert planet.
yeah, there's literally nothing there
Yeah.
except these little worms that kill people.
Yeah.
And so I think he was angry. He's like, man, it shouldn't have been this difficult, and here we are. You put us here.
Yeah.
But again, yeah, Kirk did set him free, so that was kind of weird. And,
Well, and also Khan, if he's supposed to be like the follow-up to a Napoleon type figure or like a Genghis Khan type figure, like a conqueror like that, it seems like having like a personal vendetta against somebody like that, it seems kind of petty, I thought, right? Because Khan, if he has this Genesis thing, his main goal should be to go off and take over some planet, right? Rather than worry about Kirk.
Right.
But regardless, it's pretty much just a face off between Kirk and Khan, right? That's the plot of the movie, essentially.
yeah.
They have space battles, right? Khan has the he has the quote, which I heard this and I was like, I got excited because I remember it from the beginning of Kill Bill. He says, "Revenge is a dish best served cold," an old Klingon proverb, so Khan kind of surprise attacks Kirk with an attack on the Enterprise as they approach the Reliant, the other ship that they'd taken over. And a bunch of stuff explodes, a bunch of the Enterprise crew get injured, and the Enterprise does some damage to the Reliant, and the Reliant flees, right? Oh, yeah, so next off, the Enterprise stops at the space station, which was the Regula, right? So the Reliant was the name of the ship. The Regula 1 was the name of the space station. And
yes, there was a scientist and her son. They're like the main people working on the Genesis project.
Right. And so they figure out that everyone on the space station, most of them have been killed. They find Chekhov and Chekhov's friend stowing away in a cabinet somewhere. And then, then they beam to the planet and they find Dr. Marcus, right, and her crew who built the Genesis, right?
Yeah, most of them are dead at this point.
Yeah. And does Khan have the Genesis yet, or no?
I can't remember. He gets it. He beams it aboard his ship, and he's basically ready to take over the world and take over the universe.
Oh, yeah. Okay, because it's revealed that whenever they find Chekhov and Chekhov's friend on the space station, and then they go to the Genesis thing that's on the planet and all that stuff. They talk to the scientists, and then it's revealed that Chekhov and the friend are still being mind controlled, right, by the bugs. Yes. And so they pull their phasers on them. And they're like, "All right, we're gonna give give Khan the Genesis Project now, and they beam it up, and that's when you get the Khan.
You mean the
I've finally seen it in person.
Yeah, it's pretty epic. It's more epic than my terrible rendition. But yeah, and so that was kind of cool in was a Star Trek Into Darkness. Whenever you had
they give it to Spock, don't they?
Yeah, that was kind of weird, but you still hear it. You're like, yeah, Khan. Yeah, so that
perfect
was
name for screaming, passionate scream,
Right.
So yeah, that's so I guess what they have to do now is just chase Khan down, right? Get the Genesis Project back. They beam up back to the Enterprise. They chase it into a nebula. They have a space battle in the nebula, and that's pretty much it. They defeat Khan. Khan activates the Genesis to kind of self-destruct, I guess, and blow up everything in the nebula. And I guess
Reliant explodes and Enterprise escapes, but while it happens, they've had a lot of damage, and there's only the only way to save them is to move some nuclear reactor in the ship, or else the Enterprise will be destroyed.
Yeah, and so Spock has to go into this radioactive chamber where he has to fix it, sacrificing himself, right?
Right, and as Spock's dying, Kirk sees him and meets him he's behind glass, and Spock says the needs of the many outweighed the needs of the few, or in this case, the one. And so Spock knew what he was doing, and he was, I guess, as happy as you can be to sacrifice your life, but he was happy to do it for the crew so that they can live on. And they pretty much give him a Viking space funeral.
With the bagpipes and everything.
Yeah, and they launched him off into space. And while they're sad, Kirk, that was another thing. So the whole time, what was the test called that Kirk gave Kirstie Alley's character? Like the Morishabi Guru?
It was the no-win scenario thing, right?
Yeah, I can't remember. I butchered the name, but it's something like that. I can't remember what it was called now. But
was
anyways,
it Kobayashi?
It's like Moriyashi.
For some reason, I'm thinking Kobayashi. I could be
wrong.
Yeah,
the competitive eater.
Right.
But it's this test, and Kirk was the only person to defeat it and win. And Lieutenant Savick asked him how he did it, and he said he cheated. He rigged the system so that he could win, and he said he doesn't believe in a no-lose situation. And that was before Spock died, and then he's like, now I understand there is a lose. Sometimes there is a lose situation.
Yeah,
and
it truly surprised me whenever Spock died. That completely kind of took me off guard, because I'm pretty sure he's in the other sequels. I mean, don't tell me what happens.
I won't say a word.
Because I know that I'm pretty sure that Leonard Nimoy directed the third Star Trek movie, I think. But that blew my mind that he died, and so that was a crazy surprise. Also, McCoy has that line whenever Spock is about to sacrifice himself. He says, "Are you out of your Vulcan mind?" Which I thought was pretty good.
For sure.
But yeah, that's. I guess that's the movie, though, right?
Yeah, and you were surprised about one character.
Yeah, so the dude. Okay, so the assistant to the scientist, right?
Well, it was the scientist's son, David.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Okay, because in the movie, it kind of had been subtly hinted at that the scientist. What was her name again?
I don't remember, dude. I'm terrible with names. I couldn't remember the Mobiyashi Ruru, and I can't remember Kirstie Alley's character's name. So I'm not one to talk about names.
So Dr. Whatever, the creator of the Genesis Project, it had been hinted that she and Kirk had a past, right? And so
yes.
So this kid was her son, and then it's revealed, or Kirk is like, "Oh yes, you're my son too," and that confused the hell out of me. So maybe that took me off guard, because he just brings it up at the end, and you're like, "What? Was I supposed to know that? Was there?"
And then the son knew that too, because Kirk's feeling down because he just lost his best friend. And,
Yeah.
he's grieving, and then David walks in and basically goes, "I'm proud of you for what you did, Dad."
Right? It's like
super weird.
huh? Yeah. Dr. Marcus is the name of the scientist. By the way.
Okay, but yeah, so like you said, it's strongly hinted that they had a relationship, and so I don't know this for a fact, but they either had an episode that she was in it, where she was in an episode before, or they just made up this relationship just so that it shows that Kirk was a sly devil,
Sly Fox.
Yeah.
Ladies' man.
Yeah, so I don't.
Tomcat.
I'm sure maybe she was in a previous episode or something in the original series. I don't know, but obviously they make it obvious that they dabbled in lovemaking together and had a kid.
Well, I hope Kirk's paying child support. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's space, the final frontier, man. Anything can happen.
Yeah, that's the movie, though. So, again, my thoughts, I was a little bit underwhelmed because, like, I honestly thought that it was... I think I preferred Galileo 7, the episode that we watched, or The City on the Edge of Forever, to this movie. I thought that those were just better story experiences than this movie. Because I thought this movie was good, but I thought that I think I enjoyed those episodes of the show more. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and that's fair. Because like you said, this movie really, it did feel a little drawn out, and it felt more like there wasn't a whole lot to it. It was they get surprised by Khan, and there's a few battles, and that's it.
Yeah.
So it feels more like an extended episode.
Right. Like, I wouldn't say it felt drawn out because it was pretty entertaining throughout. But, yeah, it just kind of felt like slight, I guess. It was like, oh, okay, there it is. Like, that's the movie. Like, it didn't feel like as big of a deal as a Star Trek movie should, right?
Yeah, but, I mean, I thought it, as a movie, as a Star Trek movie, I thought it really does a good job of standing on its own as just a science fiction movie.
Yeah.
And you really don't need to know much about Star Trek to enjoy it, and that's what I liked about it.
Yeah.
I think it stands on its own very well.
Yeah, that's what I was saying, because there's a lot of really bad 80s sci-fi movies. Like, you probably haven't seen, like, Flash Gordon or Krull. Have you seen either of those?
No.
Like, because back in this time, like 1982, I mean, sci-fi and fantasy were, all over the place. Like, there was a ton of this stuff. And so, like a space movie, there's a lot of really bad ones. And so this is one that actually does hold up. So I can appreciate it on that level. But as part of the Star Trek franchise, it was just a little bit disappointing. But, I mean, I guess, is there... what else do you want to add to the discussion before we wrap it up?
I think we pretty much said it all. I mean, I thought it was an entertaining movie. And, I think definitely the death of Spock is very surprising. And I will say this, once they kind of move on in space, they do show that Spock's casket lands on a planet.
Ooh.
So is that setting up for the next movie? I don't know. Spoiler alert, the answer is yes.
Well, the movie is called The Search for Spock. So.
Yeah, so it's kind of... And that's another thing. Like, I knew there was going to be another movie. And that's the thing. It really catches you off guard because, like, well, aren't there more movies? But, I mean, think about it. At the time, this was the latest thing. There wasn't any plans for anything else. And then they off Spock. That was crazy.
Well, and I could be wrong. I'm going to do some research on this for the next episode. But I believe that Leonard Nimoy actually did not want to return to the franchise, but he did so whenever, like, the writers of the movie promised him a death, like he would go out with a bang, basically. And so I think that Leonard Nimoy kind of was interested in retirement. I could be completely wrong. I'm going to kind of check my info on that for the next episode, but that's kind of interesting, I guess. But I mean, I guess that about wraps it up for today's episode. Next show, we're going to talk about Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock, and Star Trek 4, The Journey Home. So the Journey Home, right?
Yes.
And so that will be our final Star Trek episode for this part. We'll probably come back in the future and do some more. We're definitely going to hit up the Next Generation show and maybe a few of those movies as well. But yeah, that pretty much does it for this episode, though. If you liked what you heard, give us a 5-star rating on iTunes. That would be awesome. And of course, subscribe to our show on your podcasting app of choice if you haven't yet. And send us an email at winerdcast@gmail.com if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or recommendations of things you would like to see us cover on the show. I'm Tyler Dietz. Nick Grant's here with me. JP's feeding his horses. We'll see you guys next Friday.